So, my name is Sarah Gillooly. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Vice President of Outreach and Engagement here at Americans United. And before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit more to you. One of the reasons that I've been so excited about the series that Dr. Dent has been running this year is because I am myself a seminarian. I am a Quaker and I attend Earlham School of Religion in a hybrid model, both in person and online, as I'm studying for a long-term mid-career shift towards chaplaincy, hospital and hospice chaplaincy. I'm also a partner, a friend. Quakers, we call ourselves, and everyone we know are friends. That's my wife and I, Mary, at our exchange of vows. We had a Quaker meeting for exchange of vows. But I'm also a lifelong advocate and a lifelong organizer and a co-conspirator for justice and for racial equality. I've been doing advocacy work since before I started my professional career, I suspect, like many of you on this call today. But for the last 17 years, I've been leading policy and advocacy at organizations as diverse as the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, an LGBT rights organization in the state of Missouri, for those of you who are local to the Midwest, and had loved my time at AU. Dr. Dent mentioned it's my last week at AU. I'm actually leaving Americans United to step into that seminarian role as the next general secretary or executive director of Baltimore Yearly Meeting. That's the 350-year-old regional denominational entity for Quakers in the Mid-Atlantic region. So I'm really delighted to be here today to talk about advocacy. So we're going to be talking about advocacy, and I want to first ground us in this common definition that we're talking about the kind of advocacy that is the work that we do as individuals or as groups, that we do in our personal lives or our professional lives, that's about influencing decisions that are political or policy related, the laws that are made, decisions about economics, how budgets are made, how money is spent in our communities or our institutions, as well as advocacy in social institutions, whether we're being advocates for our clients, if we're social workers, or perhaps being advocates for our parishioners or our patients, if we're a hospital chaplain, or any kind of social institution where we're seeking to influence a decision or make a change. So we're going to start with just some foundational knowledge and some foundational frameworks for advocacy. So when we think about advocacy, we always start with the goal. What's the change that we're trying to achieve in the world? That's the most important. Sometimes, of course, those are big changes. We're trying to pass a bill in Congress, and sometimes it's much smaller. We're trying to get our city council or maybe our denominational leadership office to make a particular decision. But what's important here is your goal is what you want, and your target is who can give you what you want. This is language that comes from an organization called the Midwest Academy, who they have a really famous strategy chart to help you map out your own advocacy. But the point here about a target is sometimes when we're doing our advocacy work, we say, oh, I'm just trying to reach the public. Oh, I'm like trying to reach the masses. Oh, I'm just, I'm trying to do the good work. But the goal of having a target in advocacy is to be really crystal clear on who can give me what I want, who can give us what we want, who can give us what our goal is. It's very rarely everyone. It's very rarely the public. If we're talking about voting, of course, that's everyone. But oftentimes, we forget this, and our target is an individual human being. Maybe it's your member of Congress, maybe it's your mayor, maybe it's the vicar of your general synod. It's really a specific human being who can give you what you want, which is what your goal is. So your goal is what you want. Your target is who can give you what you want. And your tactic is how do you convince the person who can give you what you want that they ought to give it to you? So in advocacy, you hear a lot of conversation about tactics. We all like to sort of jump immediately to tactics. How am I going to give a speech? Am I going to preach? Am I going to go out to the steps of the Capitol building? Am I going to write a letter to the editor or click on this email? We think a lot about the tactics, but it's really important to make sure that our tactics are tied to influencing the person who can give us what we want. And in order to figure out our tactics, we have to think about what's the power that we have. You can think about power also as resources. Maybe you have people power. You have an entire congregation, an entire community. You have 15 of your friends and neighbors. That's power. But your power might be other things. It might be money. It might be political influence. It might be, particularly for this group, many of you who are faith or religious or denominational leaders, sorry, I got a little distracted by something that popped across my screen. Those are other kinds of power. Titles are power. Influence is a power. It is a resource, as are another form of resource or power might be enthusiasm, energy, political momentum, public attention. Those are resources that can help us choose our tactic to get the person who can give us what we want. So I want to just sort of set up this framework as we start to talk about advocacy. So choosing tactics, this is the most exciting part of advocacy, is what am I going to do? What are we going to do? And when we're picking our tactics, we have to think about our power from that last slide, our resources. What do we have and who are we trying to reach? And I want to make a note here that when we're thinking about tactics, there's less personal tactics, petitions, mass emails, mass text messages, mass media, patch through phone calls. That's that thing where someone calls you on the phone and says, "Hi, I'm working on X, Y, and Z bill in the state legislature. Can I put you through to your senator?" That's a patch through call. Rallies at state capitals or in our city halls, social media postings, sign-on letters is a thing we do a lot here in DC. It's a less personal tactic. And when you have a less personal tactic, you need huge numbers of people. Depending on, if we're talking about your city council in a small town, it might be a couple hundred people. When you're talking about Congress, it's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people in order for your tactic to be influential. But then when you think about, there are tactics that are far more personal. Things like direct lobbying, going to your lawmaker and asking for what you want one-on-one. Figuring out, who does my target listen to? Who does my state representative, Representative Smith, who do they care about? Who's most influential in their life? Maybe it's their top donor. Maybe it's their pastor. Maybe it's their neighbor who they trust. Coffee visits is another really personal tactic that doesn't require hundreds and thousands of people. This is my personal favorite tactic. Members of Congress are not likely to get coffee with you. But when we're talking about state legislatures in particular, and that's where my expertise really is in state legislative advocacy, those folks love to get to know their constituents. They rarely have an opportunity to do so. They're traveling between the Capitol and their homes. And when you reach out and say, "I'm a constituent, I'd love to get coffee, I'd love to get to know you," I find that lawmakers are usually quite amenable to that at the state level. They want to sit down with you, and it is such a powerful and influential tactic to get your target to give you what you want or to influence their thinking. And it only requires one person, maybe two or three, to sit down and have coffee with a lawmaker. Likewise, storytelling, work that anyone who is in seminary does a lot of, telling the stories of ourselves and our communities, the stories of what we believe. That's a really impactful tactic that doesn't require a lot of people. And then, of course, there's things in the middle, things where you could have a group of 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 and make a big impact. Nothing is more powerful than a lawmaker getting handwritten letters, not a form email on the internet, but a handwritten card or a note that you've taken the time. State lawmakers pull out those handwritten notes all the time. They read them. Having an in-district meeting where you go as a group and meet with your lawmaker and talk about what you want and why. Bird dogging, this is also a fun tactic where you follow a politician around and show up at their town halls and show up at their events and ask them the same question again and again, letting them know that you're paying attention to their work. Cultural organizing, art, music, song. You only need a few folks to do that kind of work. So the point here is, when you're thinking about your own advocacy and the work that you want to do to make change on some of the issues we're going to talk about today, or any of the issues that you care about, really thinking about, how many people do I have? What kind of influence can I have? How can I influence my target? by choosing a tactic that is in scale with the power that I have, the resources that I have. The power of one is power enough. And so if you have one or if you have 1,000, really thinking about how can I use the power in this resource to make the change that I'm looking for. I want to pause here. We're going to do a little bit of chatting with each other in the chat box, or unmute yourself. And for anyone who has attended at least seminaries in the Christian tradition, which while I'm a non-theist, Quakers are historically a Christian tradition. And so folks who have attended seminaries in the Christian tradition have probably done an inventory of your spiritual gifts. For those of us who are non-theists or non-religious, we can think about those as our talents, our natural talents, or even our skills. And we do this work to really think about, what are my talents? What am I as a human being uniquely good at? What can I contribute to the world? Usually in seminary, in the context of my ministry, what can I contribute with what I have? It's about asking the question of, like, what do I have? Where am I uniquely talented? On the left, for those of you who aren't familiar with the idea of a spiritual gift, this is how folks who are thinking about spiritual gifts, some of the types of spiritual gifts that we talk about: hospitality, knowledge, writing, leadership, pastoring, art, music, song, outreach, evangelism, or even enthusiasm is another way to think about evangelism. Discernment, exhortation, being a convincing speaker. And so as we move into thinking about our own advocacy, I want to ask the group, what are your advocacy gifts? What are your talents? Maybe if you've done a spiritual inventory and you're like me and you're like, I already know I am really good at exhortation, maybe it is related. But whether or not you're a seminarian, whether or not you're secular or religious, whether or not you're a non-theist or a Christian, we each have talents and we can apply them to advocacy. And so I want to sort of take that step and that opportunity to ask you, what are your advocacy gifts or talents? What about you, Sabrina, Dr. Dent? I'm going to call on you.
Definitely hospitality and outreach are two of the things that those are gifts that I know that I have, as well as giving. So
tell us a little bit more. How does hospitality show up in advocacy for you? What does that look like?
Right. So for me, hospitality looks like, and making sure that I'm inviting various conversation partners to be a part of the discussion. It's making it an environment that is warm and welcoming, whether it's virtual or if it's in person. So it comes out in many different ways. Hospitality is how I speak and how I share, but also how I listen. And I think that's the key thing for me in this work, is listening. You can't do outreach and not listen to the people that you're engaging or hope to advocate for and with. Thank
you. Liz in the chat lifting up that she's a writer. That's her advocacy gift or her advocacy talent. So what I want you to take away here is to be sophisticated advocates. We want to be activists, right? We want to respond to the request. When the organization emails us and says, please click here and contact your lawmaker and send this mass email, that's activism. That's incredibly important. But when we're seeking to be deeper advocates who are powerful and impactful in our advocacy work, asking yourself that question of, where am I uniquely talented? In the same way that if we're in seminary, we can be asking ourselves, what are my unique gifts or talents to apply to my future work? It's the same question. So I'm going to give you my top, I think it's 4 tips for advocacy. We're going to watch a quick video, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about it.
Of creatures. We make decisions based mostly on emotions instead of facts, and a lot of times we're guided by tribal instinct. Part of the problem is that the human brain evolved to help us survive, and not necessarily to help us be factually accurate. So we often respond better to social and tribal dynamics than to intellectual analysis. For example, if someone's tribe believes that Obama is a secret Muslim born in Kenya, that person probably thinks the hard proof of his US birth certificate is fake. That conclusion is neither rational nor accurate. But from a tribal perspective, it makes sense. It's safer to agree with your tribe and stay united ideologically, even if you're wrong about the facts, than to disagree and isolate yourself. Another part of the problem is that our brain is constantly protecting our worldview and sense of identity. So when our worldview is challenged, that same part of the brain that processes physical danger gets activated. This is why people sometimes react so aggressively to information that proves them wrong. And this is why it's often so hard to have an intelligent political debate. Several studies have also shown that there is a backfire effect that happens when people encounter facts that contradict their current beliefs. They actually become more convinced of their original ideas. So fighting ignorance with facts is like fighting a grease fire with water. It seems like it should work, but it actually just makes the whole thing worse. Lastly, there's the problem of lack of empathy. Several studies have found that when humans are divided into groups of any kind, we instinctively become less empathetic to members of other groups. That means that for survival's sake, we might instinctively empathize less with other races, other nationalities, and even other sports teams. This instinctive dehumanization of other groups is what makes things like slavery and genocide possible in our society. So, what can you do? If you want someone to consider factual information that clashes with their beliefs, first you have to prevent their brain from seeing you as a personal threat. So, look for ways to identify the person as part of your tribe and you as part of theirs. Hey, we're part of the same family. Hey, we're both parents. Hey, we both still play Pokemon Go. Whatever. Anything that communicates that you're part of the same tribe. That's the first step. Second, consider the possibility that you may be wrong. Maybe the facts are not on your side, in which case admitting it will help you model to the other person that it's okay to be wrong. I understand that none of this is easy or smooth, but if we want to continue to function as a stable society, we have to learn to get past our own natural biases. Only when that happens, we will be able to move forward towards a better future. Peace.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that quick troubleshooting. So I do want to note that the imagery here around Indigenous people is problematic. I have not found a video that communicates the same concepts with less problematic imagery. So if you are aware of one, please send it my way. But I want to sort of stop and ask, does this resonate with you? I think many folks on this call likely would identify as liberal or progressive. We love facts. We like to be right. We like to appeal to science and reason as sort of core philosophies. But we know that facts don't always win the day. So I'm not saying facts are irrelevant. Of course, they're important. Data, facts, science, it's all important. But they aren't always the first or best or most successful way in advocacy, to lead only with facts. So I want to offer a different framework. This is drawn from the work of George Lakoff, also a Quaker, I'd like to note. George Lakoff has done this seminal work throughout his career to talk about values as the framework for political advocacy. This probably isn't new news to you. This idea has really been used on the political right for many decades and increasingly on the political left to think about the values framework, the framework in which we're operating. So Lakoff identifies a couple of different values framework and notes that these are two that are particularly prevalent in the United States. On the left, this is sort of how you tend to see political liberals operate, who care about things like, he calls it the nurturing parent framework, empathy, community, fairness, equality, cooperation, also novelty and complexity. And on the political right, you're more likely to see folks operating from a values framework of what Lakoff calls the strict father: self-interest, patriotism, tradition, desire for security, to be safe, for things to be predictable, a respect for authority. And so when we're thinking about our advocacy, when we're thinking about our target, really taking a minute to ask yourself, what is the values framework in which my target is operating? This isn't about manipulation. This is about speaking so your message can be heard. If I am a political conservative and I say to my political liberal sister, gosh, we really, I don't, that's not a bad example. I can't even think of what I would say. I gotta reverse that. If I'm it's a nice chuckle there, David. If I'm a political liberal and I'm talking to my politically conservative sister in Florida, and I'm trying to talk to her about the need for LGBTQ equality, and I say, it's about fairness. It's just about simple equality. those aren't things she cares about, right? Those aren't her values framework. I'm sure she would say she cares about them, but they aren't the framework by which her values are based. If I talk to her instead about tradition, we have a long tradition in this country of letting people be free to be themselves. It's part, to me, of being a patriotic American to fight for laws that allow us all to be free. Is much more likely to invite her in to have a conversation, to see me as understanding her, or as that video said, part of a tribe together. Lakoff also offers this as an example. So imagine you have a political candidate who is running for office or has a plan to increase the minimum wage. And one framework would be to say, yeah, I have this vision that's based on economic justice and fairness and compassion for the poor. I stand for policies that are based on that care, justice, things that will stop corporations from exploiting people and pocketing profits. And another framework to talk about the exact same policy is, I have a vision for this country that's based on values and the traditions that have been handed down to me. Those American traditions of hard work, loyalty to our company, to our country, to our employer, and the freedom to forge one's own path in life. And I believe it's patriotic to put American families ahead of big money donors and special interests. So that's just to sort of highlight that. Now, I'm not naive. I'm not saying if you simply change your framework, you're going to convince every conservative politician to support the Do No Harm Act. But when you're thinking about who can give you what you want, or you're thinking about who you can bring with you, who you can add into your fold of power and resources, connecting with them through the values framework that is most relevant in their own life. This really has echoes, those of you who have been trained in giving pastoral care, of really listening to the language that somebody else uses and using that same language to speak back to them. It's that same skill. Tip 2, maybe it's 3, comes from Dr. Dent's friend and colleague, Reverend Roland Stringfellow, who is a pastor and a gay man and a Midwesterner who's working on LGBTQ equality in society and in the church. And he said to Sabrina recently to a webinar, everyone has a title. You might not be a big political donor. You might not be a moral influencer with a collar, but you are a mother. You're a voter. You're a concerned parent. You are a person of commitment and value. We all have a title. And so when we feel, who am I to say? Who am I to talk to that person? Who am I to ask for this meeting, ask for this coffee meeting, ask for this in-district meeting? You have a title. You have a title. And then throwing this one in, because seminarians, this is how we tick. The reminder that when we're doing our own advocacy, that caring for ourselves and others is part of that advocacy. So this is a framework that I have developed for working with our youth fellows here at Americans United. And I encourage you to steal this if you would like to steal this. This framework, just to explain it a little bit, soothing care. This is self-care that's like, how am I going to bring down my central nervous system? How am I going to care for myself in the immediate? This is the sort of like mythical self-care bubble bath. It's all going to be solved by a bubble bath. Those things are important. They help us self-regulate. They help us center. They ground us. That's a form of care that we can use when we're being advocates. Nourishing care is the kind of care that helps sustain us personally. Maybe your nourishing self-care is about exercise or meditation or prayer or letter writing or religious services, the ways that we fill our cups up and when they are empty and keep them filled. That's sort of this like nourishing kind of self-care. And then when we think about sustaining care, this is community care. This is, what do I need to do in order to make sure that the community I'm advocating with is healthy, is cared for, that they are nourished, that they are soothed, that together this work is not extracting our humanity, it's not extracting our resources, but it lifts us up together. And so I offer this framework and this tip to keep in mind, this is hard work. It is exhausting and demoralizing to know that it takes decades to pass a bill in Congress, that we might be fighting impossible odds in our communities where we maybe are, if you are the atheist or the pantheist in small town Louisiana, it is a hard road. So remembering that care for ourselves and our community, our power, our resources, that those are aspects of good advocacy work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a few different advocacy tools, IRL. Going to show you a few things. We're going to have a live phone call to my member of Congress, and I am excited to get started. So this is a really wonderful tool, equalitytime.org. So this is a coalition website, Equality Time. It is all the national LGBTQ organizations, also organizations like AU, state-based organizations, a huge broad coalition of folks, faith-based organizations who've come together to create an action hub for the Equality Act. One of the things I love about Equality Time is it gives you these options for getting involved. You can sign up to join a virtual phone bank right from your home, to call voters in high priority states, to ask those voters to patch them through to their members of Congress and asking their members of Congress to support the Equality Act. There's also an op-ed kit. So Liz, you said that writing is one of your advocacy gifts. There's a toolkit there that gives you some resources and some ideas about how you might write an op-ed in your hometown newspaper. There are other resources there as well, but I wanted to highlight that this is a nice advocacy home, a place to get those tools and resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to figure out what is going to influence, when we're thinking again about that target, how do I get that? What's the tactic to get my target to give me what I want? Someone else has figured out what the tactics are, and they're asking you to pick the one that best fits you. I know you've also talked about the Do No Harm Act, AU's signature legislative priority that returns the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to its original intent. It says that religious freedom is a shield to protect, not a sword to harm others. And this is a toolkit that David, who's on the call today, Dr. Sabrina Dent, and I have put together. That's a whole boatload of advocacy tools. There's an op-ed toolkit in there, and suggestions on writing a letter to the editor. There are specific ideas for young people in here. There's specific ideas for religious and faith leaders in this toolkit. Again, we have sort of pre-selected the tactics for you based on what we know is going to move the targets on the Do No Harm Act. So I want to offer that as a resource. And here's the big moment. I am going to take one of the suggestions from this toolkit, which is to simply reach out to my member of Congress. So before I make this phone call, and I'm making this phone call for a reason that I'll tell you in a minute, I live in Tacoma Park. I am in the district of Representative Jamie Raskin, who's a Democrat. People at AU know I also think he's a dreamboat, a political dreamboat. And Representative Congressman Raskin is one of the original co-sponsors on the Do No Harm Act. So right now at AU, we have been asking our volunteers and supporters and members, we love Jamie Raskin, Katie Joseph, yes, from Interfaith Alliance, and Congressman Raskin, so he's helped write and sponsor the bill. But at AU right now, we've been asking our supporters and our members to organize in-district meetings with members of Congress. We need to have several hundred co-sponsors in the House on the bill in order to have the power to get a hearing on the bill. So in Congress, you introduce a bill and then you get a hearing and then you get a floor vote. So we've had this bill introduced a few times, but the next step is what we want is to get a hearing on the bill. Who can give us what we want is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And in order to get the chairman of the Judiciary Committee to give us what we want, the tactics to reach our target is he needs to see at least 200 co-sponsors on the bill, which we know we can achieve. And he needs to hear from those members who've already supported the bill. So we're asking, and this is all detailed in the toolkit, we're asking our folks to reach out, contact their members, have a meeting, and either ask them to support, co-sponsor the bill, or if they've already sponsored the bill, say thank you, and then ask them to ask for a hearing in House Judiciary. I think calling our members of Congress, if you've never done it, is sometimes a little intimidating. And so I'm going to do it live just to show you in real life, like what that looks like. So let me toggle over here to pull up Jamie Raskin's phone number, which I literally just Googled, Congressman Jamie Raskin's phone number in DC. And I'm going to put this on speakerphone. Okay, apparently in the pandemic, I should have tried that in advance. Thanks for the props on the attempt, Aaron, but it failed. But this is what I would say if they picked up and said this was Congressman Raskin's office. I would say, hi, Elizabeth, who answers the phone. My name is Sarah Gillooly. I am a constituent of Congressman Raskin. I live in Tacoma Park. We're actually neighbors. And I'm calling today because I wanted to just say thank you. I have been learning about the Do No Harm Act, which is HR 1378. And I saw that Congressman Raskin is an original co-sponsor for the bill, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm a Quaker, and as a Quaker, we have a particular it is part of who we are as a denomination to both want to make sure that no one is ever persecuted because of their religion. That's why Quakers ended up in the United States, but also to make sure that no one ever uses their religion to persecute someone else in the public sphere. That's the promise of the United States, and I'm so grateful for Congressman Raskin's leadership. I know he also has a warm relationship with Quakers. So I just wanted to say thank you to the congressman today. I hope you'll pass that message on. And I have an ask, and I'm hoping that Congressman Raskin will reach out to the chair of the House Judiciary Committee and ask for a hearing on the bill. I want other Americans and other members of Congress to learn about this bill, and a hearing would really make the difference. So do you think the congressman could ask the chair of the House Judiciary Committee for a hearing? And they would say yes or no. That whole script is actually in the toolkit. So you could, but that's what that phone call would have sounded like if I had made it in real life. I wanted to share another resource for all of you, a great advocacy resource from our friends at Faith in Public Life. Their website is up at the top of the screen. And in particular, I wanted to point you to a resource that Faith in Public Life has put out titled Messaging Guidance, Talking with Conservative White Christian Women About Faith and Politics. Faith in Public Life did some great research on how do we talk across the great divides on issues like immigration, birth control, abortion, a few other issues, and they've put together some recommendations of how do you talk within the values framework of conservative women, conservative white women in particular, to connect with them, to find the shared value in order to start a conversation. I use this tool in my personal life. I mentioned my sister. I'm the youngest of 5, and this particular sister is the one I'm closest to, and we are like political opposites. And I use this tool in my personal life even when I'm texting with her and she says something sort of inflammatory. Abortion tends to be where we often get into a little fight with each other. And I've started using this and using some of this message to start that conversation, to be an advocate who's thinking about how are we widening the circle of power, of resources. People are power. How am I adding my sister to the conversation in order to build the power that we need to win on some of these issues? So I wanted to recommend that as a fantastic advocacy resource. If you are working with people for whom these issues are hotly contested, but there are ways to connect on the shared values. So that's the end of my slide. I hope you'll stay in touch. Thursday's my last day at AU, so I have both my AU email address if you want to email me today or tomorrow, and my new email address at the Baltimore Yearly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. That's quite a title, quite an organization, in the future. So David, let's pull down those slides and use our last 15 minutes for some discussion. And maybe Dr. Dent, if there's anything you want to kick us off with for some time to chat.
I want to say thank you so much, Sarah. That was really helpful, and especially the part of you making the phone call, right, to show that it is very simple. And I actually will provide a resource to everyone that is watching, because Equality Time, as Sarah has mentioned, we have partner with Equality Time in mobilizing religious leaders around this issue and supporting the Equality Act. So I have the phone number where you could call. And also there's a little QR code that you can scan and make it easy to reach your representative as well. But Sarah, I appreciate that one of the things that you talked about was the element of care in this and self-care. It reminds me of my seminary days when my pastoral counseling professor said to us that the person is always more important than the problem, but there's always a solution to the problem too. So I really appreciate you talking about that element of care. Can you tell us more, Sarah, about where we are right now and moving the Equality Act forward? And what role can people play as soon as they get off this call?
Yeah, I can. So the Equality Act has passed the House. It's historic. They passed it last congressional session as well. And it's the first time in our nation's history that a fully inclusive non-discrimination bill that includes transgender people has passed one chamber of the US Congress. So the bill passed the House, then they sent it over to the Senate. It has to pass the Senate in order for it to go to the president's desk. Our president today has said is committed to signing that legislation if they can get it to his desk. There are enough Democrats theoretically in the Senate to move this bill to the president's desk. However, it's been stuck in the Senate because of religion and religious freedom. So many of the opponents to LGBTQ equality are raising sort of concerns that are misinformation about the bill will do things like require churches to hire trans people or to let men in the women's bathrooms. That's not true. The bill doesn't touch houses of worship when they're being used as houses of worship. But our opposition has really been raising that concern. There's, we actually have a member of our staff at AU who got a handwritten note from the nun who teaches her kids at their Catholic school, asking her to call their senator and ask them not to support the bill. So there's a real organized effort to stop the Equality Act that's coming from religious nationalists. And they're using religion as the wedge here. So what we need to do is be hammering our senators with the request to advance this bill, to move this bill, to protect not only LGBTQ equality, but as I'm sure you learned, the bill actually adds protections for religious minorities in certain kinds of public accommodations where they're not currently protected under civil rights laws, and a few other areas of civil rights law as well. So what we need to do is talk to our senators, and the way that you can do that is pick up the phone when we hang up, make that phone call, Google my two senators and their phone numbers. It's as simple as saying, I really want my senator to support the Equality Act. Maybe you're in a deep red place and you're like, she's never going to do it. It still matters to call. The staffers keep a tally list of phone calls and emails on which side of the issue constituents are on. Perhaps your senator's office is unstaffed, like Congress. Sometimes I see Congressman Raskin in the Ace Hardware in Tacoma Park. So next time I'm going to let him know. Should add an answering machine to his office. But to call those folks or send them an email or a handwritten note even to let them know where you stand on the Equality Act. And you can find some of those resources and tools at equalitytime.org.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other questions? What if the legislative staff says they won't ask for a judiciary hearing? Where does the conversation go from there? And how can we get a copy of the slides? Asked Robert.
In the next break, I will give you a copy of the slides. I can do some magic on Google Docs and then share the slides. So once I answer this, I'll share the slides. But on what if the legislator staff says they won't ask for a hearing, I would probably say something like, I know that the congressman is really busy, but when I look around the country and I see the way that religious nationalists are misusing the sacred American value of religious freedom as a weapon to harm other people, I can think of this is such an important bill to me. And more than that, Congressman Raskin, the way that we bend that arc closer towards justice is one small step at a time. And I'm asking you to take this one small step with me. That's probably, I mean, and he might still say no, but I have sort of pled my case. And of course, right, you be polite. Thank you for your time. I know the congressman is very busy. I'll try not to harass him at the Ace Hardware next weekend. Might be how I would wrap that up.
Anyone else with questions for Sarah?
Or things to share?
I have a quick question. And I guess what I am wondering is how you didn't speak much about social media and how effective is social media in terms of, or as it relates to the telephone calls and the in-person advocacy work?
That's a great question. So I'm sort of a couple of different minds about that. One of the pieces, one of the more complicated pieces about advocacy is building political will. So a social media post is unlikely on its own to persuade or move or pressure a target. However, when you have social media posts at scale, which is why organizations will organize things like Twitter storms and things like that, that can apply pressure to a politician. I'm trying to think about a particular example. An example that just happened in Missouri is lawmakers in Missouri had snuck a little provision into their budget that would have stripped all family planning money effectively out of the Medicaid program in the state of Missouri. It's a little more complicated and nuanced than that, but basically would have stripped away this family planning money for things like birth control for Medicaid poor people in the state of Missouri. It ended up a bipartisan coalition of women lawmakers in the state of Missouri defeated that. And one of the contributing factors to that defeat was a tremendous amount of social media pressure that was happening on those lawmakers, particularly on Republican women in the Missouri legislature who were just getting, and what it said to those lawmakers and the reason that kind of social media can be sometimes effective when it's really executed at scale is it says your constituents feel the following. Can be hard because who's to say where a Twitter follower is from? So I don't think it's always the most effective way unless you can do it at scale. Now, if you're trying to pressure a school board member to do something, obviously organizing enough people to have that impact is much easier. You need 100 and not 100,000. But the other way I think to be thinking about social media is when you're making those posts and those tweets, you're not applying necessarily pressure to the target, but you are trying to build the power. You're trying to build the resource, the number of people who are taking action. So giving other people the opportunity to take action, talking about an issue in new, nuanced, complicated, moral-based, valued language can be another way to invite more people in to the advocacy who maybe didn't see themselves as part of the issue or the advocacy. So I think that's another way social media can be helpful on a much smaller scale, right? Like when I'm talking to, my friends who haven't heard about the Do No Harm Act, who care about LGBTQ equality and the rights of religious minorities, including the non-religious, they might be persuaded to take an action because I've asked them to do that personal ask that we can communicate to our networks. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Lisa.
Nice to meet you.
Well, I have very much enjoyed the opportunity, Dr. Dent. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate you, and we know that you continue to do exceptional work wherever you go. And I'm grateful for you. And I'm grateful to all of you that have joined us today and over the last several weeks as we walk through the process of really understanding religious freedom, looking at what's at stake for church-state separation, really getting a better understanding of what is a religious freedom violation, and then now taking the steps to become an advocate. So I do hope that after this call that you will make a phone call to your senator and that you will take the action steps that are necessary. One of the things I also want to invite you to be a part of is I talked about the Faith Leaders United Network earlier on in the series. And so that's a network of religious lay leaders and clergy persons that sometimes take action on behalf or take action on behalf of some of the issues that we're addressing about church-state separation. And so you can visit our website to learn more about the flu and sign up. You'll receive emails periodically, just like some of you may have, to be invited to this, the AU Summer Series for Seminarians. But overall, I just want to say your voice matters, that the voices of religious leaders on these issues, especially around the Equality Act, is very critical to helping people understand how all of us are important in this life, and that all of us have the right to live and to thrive. And if we're calling on our conscience, if we're calling on our belief systems that shape the ways in which we think, and we're informed about how we should treat humanity, then hopefully we'll do everything that is possible to make sure that all of humanity gets to thrive, and that we have equality and equity and justice in the world in which we live in. And hopefully we'll leave a better world for the generations that are coming behind us. So again, I want to thank all of you for being a part of today's conversation. Sarah, thank you again. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you missed anything, these recordings are available on the AU Summer Series webpage. And so with that, I say thank you to everyone and have a great rest of the week. Happy Pride Month.